In the 1950s, America was UFO crazy. Even though the U.S. military insisted that it was a hoax, stories of an alien spacecraft crashing at Roswell, New Mexico, captured the public imagination and wouldn't let go. Hollywood responded by creating a raft of science fiction movies about these ships and their alien passengers. They offered us visions of what might happen if the aliens landed on Earth, some of them friendly, and some of them much more menacing.
Of you trying to come here to Earth, we have no alternative.
Whatever happened that night, I don't know. I wasn't there. But it was something that terrified my father till the day he died.
There's many times he'd be telling me the story and just get cracked up and just turn wide the sheet and just quit and not say nothing else about it. He just wouldn't talk about it at all.
This story happened in Christian County, Kentucky, on a little farm outside of Kelly, just 8 miles north of the city of Hopkinsville. It's a city that has a landmark event that belongs in the history books. The town recently celebrated the 50th anniversary of one of the strangest stories in American UFO history.
Hopkinsville in Christian County in the mid-1950s was principally a Protestant community of blue-collar and professional workers, a community not real stoutly committed to change in those days. Keep in mind also that this event occurred in the midst of August, when it was hot as the hinges of Hades. And so people tended not to get terribly excited about things. When it was hot weather, they would get even hotter. There was a police officer at nearby Shady Oaks restaurant, maybe 3 miles from Kelly. And this police officer indicated that sometime just prior to the reported landing of the spacecraft at Kelly, that he saw a series, maybe 3 meteors streaking northeastwardly across the sky in the general directional pattern of Kelly. It was a Sunday night, August 21st, 1955. At about 7:30 p.m., Billy Taylor went out to the outdoor privy, and while out there, observed a spaceship hovering 40 or 50 feet above the ground, and observed it land in about a 40-foot ravine or gully behind the house. Of course, concerned about it, he came on back into the house and told the members of the Sutton family whom he was visiting about this event, and Billy's reputation was noted for being creative, to put it in a nice way, and so the family paid a little attention.
About 20 minutes later, Lucky looked out the window, and what he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. Coming up towards the house from the gully were several creatures unlike anything he had ever seen before.
When members of the Sutton family first saw the creatures approaching the house, they described them as little human-like figures, 3 to 4 feet tall, with pointed ears. But the most prominent feature of their entire makeup was the large, round eyes that appeared not to blink.
A few minutes later, one of the alien creatures came right up to the window and looked in. Lucky Sutton grabbed his shotgun and fired through the window. The face disappeared. Lucky and Billy Ray, now armed as well, decided to go outside to find out what happened to the creature they'd shot. As Taylor stepped out onto the porch, a huge hand reached down from the overhang, grabbed him by the hair, and tried to pull him up. Taylor managed to get free, and both he and Lucky retreated into the house and loaded their guns with ammunition. Now the 2 men started firing at these little beings as if they were in the fight of their lives. But what happened when they fired was even more terrifying.
When the firing started, these little creatures were knocked off their feet or would do a somersault and bounce right up and float off.
The battle shifted into high gear. Altogether, the 2 men estimated that they were being attacked by between 12 and 15 of these little men. Inside the house, there was absolute chaos. The women and children hid under the bed in terror, while Lucky and Billy Ray kept shooting at the advancing aliens through the walls and window screens of the house.
Stay there! Stay there!
The terrifying attack went on for hours. Each time Billy Ray or Lucky hit their mark, the creatures would react by floating away, as if they were surrounded by an invisible force field, and then they would crawl back towards the house. At around 11 p.m., about 3 hours after the battle started, there was a brief respite. Without wasting a moment, Billy Ray and Lucky loaded everyone into cars and drove to the nearest police station in Hopkinsville to get help.
When the investigating officers arrived, they made a thorough search of the house. They were joined soon thereafter by personnel from the sheriff's office and even some military personnel from nearby Fort Campbell. A thorough search was made of the house and the grounds surrounding the house, and never did they find anything in the way of evidence pointing to the features of the story as indicated by the Suttons. The only real excitement of the night came when one of the soldiers from Fort Campbell unintentionally stepped upon the tail of a tomcat. Let's take a look at this scenario, this scene. All of these men, probably 10 or 15, walking around armed, looking for anything unusual, when all of a sudden one of the officers steps on the tail of this cat.
Other than bullet holes and the emotional state of the terrified family members, the investigating officers found no concrete evidence. Some reports suggest that police found a strange luminous stain in the grass where one of the creatures fell after being shot, but no one took a sample, and by morning there was no trace. They concluded their investigation and left. The family tried to settle down in the hope of getting some sleep, but their frightening ordeal was far from over. After the break, the aliens return, and the battle continues.
They gotta be out there.
There's no way.
In the early hours of Monday, August 22nd, 1955, Mrs. Langford witnessed one of the creatures peering through the window. The return of the creature caused a pandemonium in the house. Once again, Lucky and Billy Ray grabbed their guns and shot at the invaders. The creatures did not seem to be hostile, merely curious, but the two men weren't waiting to find out where their curiosity might lead. The battle continued until daybreak, when the creatures just disappeared. But morning didn't bring much peace to the house. The story of the alien attack was picked up by the local radio station and newspaper. Whatever the Sutton family had experienced on the night of August 21st, 1955, was now matched by another kind of assault.
There were really two circuses when you consider the events of that time, because the Shrine Club in our area had just sponsored a circus in town that weekend. Now, the other circus was the pure pandemonium of public reaction that occurred in the days following, because the news press services picked it up by means of the local radio stations and the local newspaper, the Kentucky New Era.
To add to the circus atmosphere, a newspaper editor, ignoring the actual description of the creatures that the Suttons gave, referred to the aliens as little green men. When the story was picked up by the national media, it was titled The Little Green Men of Kelly, and that name, and the ridicule it implies, has stuck to this day. In the midst of this circus atmosphere, there were people who were willing to listen to the family's story. And it's thanks to one of them, a sympathetic Hopkinsville DJ, that we have an idea of what the family says these creatures really looked like.
Bud Beckwith was an announcer on a local radio station, and he took upon himself, out of personal interest, to go to Kelly a day or two later and interview the people. He was the only individual, to my knowledge, with the artistic ability to draw their appearance from verbal descriptions, and did so. And from him, to my knowledge, are the only known existing drawings from interviews taken. And he did it simply as a serious-minded individual wanting to find out more about it and certainly interested in their physical appearance than anybody else. Without Bud Beckwith, we would not have drawings of what the Suttons thought the little green men looked like.
After the family was driven out of their house, they closed ranks and refused to talk to any more reporters about what had happened. It was more than 10 years later that Lucky was finally persuaded to tell the story that his younger children had never heard. There may be another compelling reason to believe that they were telling the truth. The children of Lucky Sutton recently revealed that there was evidence missed by the investigators on the night of the attack. Evidence that Lucky Sutton knew existed, but had only told his family members.
My father said that where the spacecraft or spaceship left some impressions in the ground. And I never actually got to see it. It was brought to my attention by my sister that he did take all of his kids when we was babies out to the area where this did happen. I was probably too young to remember, but I have an older brother that said that he did get to go and see the impressions in the ground, and there's no way it could have been man-made.
Despite the lack of physical evidence of a spaceship or alien creatures at the cabin, in the years that followed, the police chief who led the investigation said there was one thing that made him believe it was true.
The only pointed evidence in the entire story is gleaned from the interview made in later years with Police Chief Russell Greenwell. Chief Greenwell repeatedly emphasized his several interviews with Mrs. Langford, the mother of the group.
Well, I saw what I saw, and I was very frightened. It even scares me now to talk about it.
And each time he interviewed her, he observed a terror-stricken fear in her eyes.
August 2005 marked the 50th anniversary of what is now known as the Kelly Green Men incident. In the city of Hopkinsville, where the Sutton family was once ridiculed, the event was celebrated with a conference. There were speakers going over the facts of the case as they'd experienced it, or as they'd been told by one of the participants. This time, no one was making fun of the family.
This was a scared family that ran into something that night that they didn't understand, that, you know, was something that they'd never seen before.
I do believe it did happen because I've known my father for better than 30 years. And I've never known him to ever tell a tall tale like that. And if he did, I could see through it. And this is just one of those situations to where I could tell he just terrified of the whole situation. And I consider myself lucky to know the story that he would be willing to sit down and tell me the story of the Kelly Green Men. I'm just glad he got to tell me that before he passed away.
I believe that there's things out there besides us. What they are, I have no idea. Nobody does. But you can't tell me there's not. You know, whatever happened that night at Kelly happened. Something happened to that family. They didn't understand what it was, so nobody else understood. You know, but something happened. And yes, when I hear about UFOs, when I see lights in the sky at night, if I can't figure out what it is, it terrifies me.
If the truth were to come out about the little green men of Kelly, I would venture the guess to us all that there would be a tremendous decline in interest, because we as human beings are always fascinated by the unknown. We want answers, and yet at times to realize we may get the answer would scare us to death.
Will we ever know what really happened that hot August night in 1955? With most of the witnesses gone, we are left with a mystery about one of the most frightening UFO encounters in history. After the break, a Viking ship that appears every 30 years in the waters of northern Newfoundland.